The gravity crusher's shell split open at the seams, and what came out of that shell was not a machine or a creature or even a force. It was a verdict. Asira watched the human's eyes change color. They had been brown before, the warm, dull brown of old wood, of things that grew slow and died unremarkably. Now they were red, not blood red, not rage red, something older than both, something that had no name in any language the Holovren had developed across 4,000 years of cataloged taxonomy. She watched his spine straighten. She watched his shoulders drop. She watched every last visible remnant of the creature who cooked her food and set her table and asked quiet questions about her homeworld drain out of his face like water from a cracked vessel. He shifted weight to the balls of his feet. The gravity crusher loomed above him. It did not yet understand what it had triggered. If something in you already knows what happens next, stay. You've earned the ending. 3 hours ago, this room had smelled like chalk dust and old paper. The venom vial sat in its case on the third shelf, sealed, unbothered, positioned exactly where Asira had placed it upon her arrival at the archive tower 6 days prior. It had not moved. The dust around its base had not shifted. It was, in every measurable sense, the most stable object in the room, which was also, in every measurable sense, the most stable room in the building, which was itself the most stable building in the sector. Asira had chosen this posting deliberately. She was 412 years old. She had earned the right to a stable room. The tower's upper shelves rose 40 feet above the main floor, connected by iron walkways that rang softly when stepped upon. Chalk dust from centuries of archival work had settled into the grain of the wooden floors until the floors themselves had gone pale. The air tasted dry. It tasted, Asira sometimes thought, of patience, of all the things that had sat here long enough to become permanent fixtures. She had brought a bodyguard because protocol demanded it, not because she needed one. The human moved through the space with a particular careful silence of something that understood it did not belong. He set her reading lamp at the correct angle each morning without being asked. He had mapped her preferred walking paths within the first day and cleared the narrower aisles of obstruction without comment. When she required tea, it appeared. When she required silence, he became architectural. She had concluded after 3 days, a well-designed tool. Functional, appropriately self-effacing. She had looked at him that second morning, really looked, the way one examines new furniture for quality of construction, and found nothing alarming. Medium height by human standards. Unremarkable build. Hands that were slightly too large for his frame, which she found faintly ridiculous. He held her gaze for exactly as long as was respectful and then returned to his work, and she had thought, yes, adequate. She had called him that. Later, not to wound, simply as classification. You are adequate, she had said, reviewing star charts at her desk. The previous attendant was marginally less so. You should find that encouraging. He did not respond. He was slicing the Vren-modified grain she'd brought from the central markets, adapting the preparation from memory, she noted, because she'd explained it once, and his expression did not change. Not offense, not gratitude, just continued attention to what he was doing, the knife moving with a steadiness she found, if she was honest, faintly annoying. She had wanted a reaction. She had not received one. He gave his rations to the servant on the lower floor. One of the tower staff had mentioned on day 4. Went hungry himself. Asira had filed this information under inexplicable primate behavior. She had not returned to it. The venom vial sat in its case. The chalk dust settled. The tower was quiet in the way very old places are quiet. Not empty, but full of accumulated stillness. The thing about archive towers is that nothing violent is supposed to reach them. They are chosen precisely because nothing violent ever has. Keep that in mind. She had been reading for 2 hours when the lower-level alarm sounded. Not the mild tonal alert that signaled administrative disruption. The secondary alarm. The one that had not triggered in this building in 60 years. The human put down his work. He did it without urgency. That was the first wrongness. Not dramatic, not alarming. Simply wrong. The way a door swinging inward when it should swing outward is wrong. A small violation of expected physics. He set the cutting board aside, wiped his hands on the cloth at his belt, and turned toward the stairwell with the methodical attention of someone completing a task they had already planned for. On the shelf beside Asira's desk, the venom vial began to vibrate. She noticed this. She did not immediately understand why her body noticed before her mind did. The faint harmonic in the sealed glass, the way the vial's contents shifted almost imperceptibly inside their casing. Her light core registered something before she had named it. A frequency, an approaching weight. The gravity crusher breached the eastern wall on the 4th floor 40 seconds later. It was large. This is almost insufficient as a descriptor, but it is the most accurate one. It was large in the way that renders other measurements temporarily useless. The stone archway framing the eastern entrance did not slow it. The iron walkways on the 3rd level buckled as its mass redistributed the air pressure in the room. 3 shelving units along the north wall toppled in sequence. 14 centuries of archived records hit the floor in cascading waves of pale dust. Asira's light core flickered. 14 others were present in the tower. All of them moved toward exits, toward cover, toward each other in the animal panic of creatures whose instincts understood something their minds were still processing. The sounds they made were the correct sounds for the situation. The running was the correct response. The human did not run. He stood at the base of the stairwell where the gravity crusher had descended, and he looked at it, and the expression on his face was not fear. It was not bravado. It was something Asira had no category for, a kind of interior settling, like tectonic plates finding their new arrangement after a shift. He shifted weight to the balls of his feet. She had called him furniture. She had called him furniture. She had been wrong. He moved first, not toward an exit, not laterally, not backward, forward, closing the distance between himself and a machine that had been designed by a species that measured threat in planetary mass, and he did it at a pace that suggested he had calculated exactly how much time he had and found the number acceptable. The gravity crusher's lower limbs recalibrated. It had not, in its operational history, encountered something that moved toward it. The recalibration cost it 1.3 seconds. He used them. The first contact was a strike to the lateral casing joint, not the reinforced exterior. The joint, the gap between the armored plates at the creature's midsection where the gravitational coils met the outer hull. The sound it made was wrong. Not the ring of metal on metal. Something duller. Something with give in it, which meant the exterior plating had been struck hard enough to stress the underlying material. He hit it again. Same location. The gravity crusher adjusted its mass distribution, attempting the pool that had collapsed 3 buildings in the southern quarter. Nothing moved. This was the moment, Asira would later understand, when whatever ancient sequence lived inside his cells fully overrode the architecture of the creature she had known. His eyes had already changed. Now his body followed. The tremor in his hands, the fine, constant tremor she had noticed and catalogued as minor physiological irregularity, irrelevant, stopped entirely. Pain immunity, she would learn later. Not numbness. Not shock. Something older. Something that had been selected for across generations of survival in conditions the Holovren had classified, from a safe distance, as incompatible with complex life. Pair bonding rewires neural pathways permanently, the science had always said. She had read it in 12 different academic contexts and understood it as biological trivia. She had not considered that the rewiring worked in both directions, that something in him had been altered by proximity to her, had begun to treat her continued existence as a non-negotiable parameter, and had prepared for this possibility in the quiet architecture of his nervous system long before tonight. He caved the sternum inward. One motion. Both hands. The gravity crusher's gravitational coils destabilized as the internal housing buckled, and the machine folded around the impact point with the particular finality of structural collapse. It did not fall so much as cease to hold its shape. The dust that rose from the wreckage drifted up through the archive light in pale columns. He bought me a gift, Asira thought, in the stunned grammatical structure of someone whose internal language had simplified down to its load-bearing elements. He gave the Empire a warning. He stood in the settling dust with his hands at his sides. The tremor had returned. Both hands. The fine, constant tremor she had dismissed as irrelevant. He was looking at her across the distance of the archive floor, through the pale columns of displaced chalk dust, and his eyes were brown again. Just brown. Old wood. Slow growth. You remind me why I stopped hiding, he said. His voice was level. It was directed at her. She did not respond immediately. Her light core was still recalibrating. The flicker had not fully resolved, and she was aware of it the way she was aware of her own pulse, a baseline signal she did not normally track. She was tracking it now. He crossed the floor toward her. When he reached her, he leaned, very slightly, against her arm. Not a collapse, not a request, a placement, the deliberate, careful placement of weight against something he had decided, in whatever calculation ran beneath his visible thinking, to trust. She held still. The venom vial's cork had come loose. It sat slightly ajar in its case, the seal broken by the pressure shift during the fight, the contents having shifted without spilling. Intact, but altered. Open, but not lost. She did not know what to call what she was doing when she placed her hand against his shoulder in return. She was 412 years old. She had no category for this. His hands were shaking when he held mine. Not from weakness. The chalk dust settled back to the floor. It always does.